How's it going, folks? I'm Matthew. This is Lemora's Cards, and today I want to do something a little bit different. Take a look through the history of cEDH, maybe start a series if people are interested. I don't know, but at least we'll get a look at some of these old sets. But today we're going to be talking about the best cEDH cards from every Magic set, and we're going in chronological order, starting with Alpha Beta Unlimited and working our way up to whatever set will be out by the time this is done recording. There's a new set every week, so hard to say. No one can keep up with the schedule, but I think it's Aether Drift. So by the time maybe we finish this, maybe on Aether Drift, maybe the next set, who knows? But we're looking at the first 20-ish sets today, working our way up through Masques block, and we have sets that are absolute bangers that could have 10, 15 cEDH staples, and sets where you have to really dig through the garbage. That is a lot of early Magic. Some of the most broken sets and some of the worst cards of all time, just kind of spread throughout, and that's what people were playing with. If you enjoyed this video, let me know down below what your list looks like. You got some things you disagree with, things I've maybe left out. There's a whole lot of cards, so it's easy to skip over some, especially more niche ones. Tried to stick to the things that were the most prevalent kind of staples, and then if there weren't really bangers from the set, kind of going in a little bit deeper and being like, hey, this is a niche player here, this is a whatever combo piece there. And let me know if you want me to continue doing this or something like this. Well, that being said though, let's go ahead and hop into it with Magic's very first set, Alpha Beta Unlimited. There are a lot of really good cards. If it wasn't for the ban list, Black Lotus and the Moxen would be on here, but a lot of stuff from OG Magic is way too powerful and not legal in our format. So some honorable mentions that are legal, of course, are things like Demonic Tutor, Lightning Bolt, Swords to Plowshares, Dark Ritual, Red Blast. But I think for our format, there's really only two options in terms of the most impactful things. And on the high end of power level right now, post ban, Soul Ring is our best piece of fast mana for the most part. It's kind of the high roll. It's the thing you tutor for. And the dual lands, which are kind of the foundational piece of mana bases outside of the fetch lands, which maybe eventually we'll get to covering. And so I think these are the best choices. You could argue Demonic Tutor as well. I think that one probably has the next best argument. It's kind of tough. I do think it's pretty relevant that the dual lands were replaced with shock lands, so there is something you can do with those. But that's mainly only an option really high color decks. I've seen Sisay builds that run just shock lands and fetches. But once you go to 3 color or less, especially, they're running both. And so not having both would be pretty detrimental to their mana bases. So it might be the dual lands, but with the power level of Soul Ring, it's kind of easy to say it's that too. Willing to call this one a tie, but I think in terms of overall what impacts most games, it is dual lands, because dual lands are played in every single cEDH game, barring turn 1 wins where they let on a mana confluence or something. Dual lands pretty much are always there. Kind of, I think, more definitive of our format, but of course Soul Ring's at the peak of power, so I'm gonna give it to dual lands. But I think Soul Ring and potentially Demonic Tutor both have very good arguments as well. Arabian Nights, a incredibly powerful set for Magic in general, not too impactful on our format. I think it's just City of Brass. I don't even have any honorable mentions, really. There's a lot of cards that were just pushed for the time, creatures that were much stronger than what people were doing, things that are banned in our format and probably wouldn't even be any good, like Library of Alexandria, stuff like that. Hot take, I know, but I don't think Library would be any good in our format. Maybe post-ban would see some play. But anyways, so I think it's City of Brass, the first Rainbow land. Arabian Nights is a really cool set and has a lot of really interesting, very flavor-focused design. It's a cool one to go look through the file of if you want to do that. I really like the Magic history stuff. Been watching the receivables, love that. This is kind of a little bit of doing some of that too, getting to talk about the sets with you, but Arabian Nights, not too much to talk about. Antiquities is also set with ridiculous designs. Cards like Mishra's Workshop, which are just absolutely nuts. In our format, do see a little bit of play in pretty niche decks, but not too widespread. As the resident Rog Thras fanboy, I gotta mention Candelabra of Tanos, which is another banger from Antiquities, but it's super niche. So I think the most ubiquitous, powerful card in Antiquities is just Transmute Artifact, which is just fine. Tivits play it, Rog Thras, Kinnons, decks that are comboing with a specific artifact, they run it. It's pretty nice. It's got sick art. It's overpriced. I can tell you that. I just bought mine for recently, but I think that's the best thing we got in Antiquities, other than some, again, more niche stuff. Workshop does lead to some really cool stuff. I've been playing that in Magda and building a Rog Tevish stacks list that uses it, which is pretty sick in. But I think it's Transmute Artifact, just good, flexible tutor, pretty powerful card. Pivot Time Civ, Kin Basalt, all that good stuff. Legends has 2 really interesting cards. This is another set, that first introduced gold cards and the legendary card type. So obviously incredibly impactful. Introduced the Elder Dragons, Nicol Bolas, and all of them boys. But overall, is a really weak giant set of like a million cards that are really underpowered, especially those legends. But does have some crazy cards, especially for the time. You know, Mana Drain is absurd in 1v1 Magic, especially. But both of these cards are really similar in that they often pop up in historically sort of lower mid-rangey Simic plus decks, like literally together. Like these cards just go hand in hand in my mind in cEDH history. They both have not necessarily been super power crept out in terms of there are better cards at their mana values, but more like the game is just faster, especially pre-ban, where Sylvan Library felt just way too slow. Mana Drain, similar deal. It being the double blue pips, even although I'll say even like cards like Delay, you know, are kind of iffy, just 2-mana interaction when there's so much free stuff. They've also both had a little bit of a comeback, especially Mana Drain. You'll see more decks like Tivit and more of the mid-rangey piles, even some of the TNTs opt to use Mana Drain. Just when you know you have a little bit more time, works better. Same with Sylvan Library. I think over the course of the format, Sylvan Library was impactful for longer, where people were still playing it, I think, even after dumping Mana Drain, where it was no longer a staple of our format. But it seems like Mana Drain is kind of coming back now that things have slowed down a little bit, and being able to hit creatures, especially with your counter spells, is a lot nicer, more relevant. So I kind of want to give it to Mana Drain, though I think historically it's probably Sylvan Library, and that card maybe even still is a little underplayed, hard to say, but I'm probably going to give it to Mana Drain for Legends. Use the link in the description below to download Whatnot, and you'll get $15 to use to buy Magic singles, sealed product, get anything that you want, really. There's no limits. You just get $15 on the account for free just for signing up. Use the link in the description below. Give Whatnot a try. The Dark, a set with a super cool theme, super cool artwork. The Rhystic Studies video, especially on the Dark and the Satanic Panic of the 90s, is a really, really awesome video. It's one of my favorite YouTube videos, period. So I definitely go check that out. Not a lot of cards that see a lot of play in our format. I don't have any honorable mentions. It's pretty much Fellwar Stone and Blood Moon as just the two cards that have seen a lot of play. With Fellwar Stone clearly seeing much more play across a wide variety of decks and across all of the time of this format. I think it is a very clear, like, this is the most played card from the Dark. There's no question. Appeared in significantly more decks. Blood Moon, though, is sort of iconic, and especially post Dockside is starting to have a lot more use. Punishes these guys, Cradle, high color piles, especially. So Blood Moon, I think, is starting to pop up more and is a card you need to respect more that Dockside is gone. But Fellwar Stone, in terms of ubiquity, just absolutely eclipses Blood Moon, no matter how cool the Blood Moon looks and how cool the Dark set symbol looks on it. Like, everything about that just looks amazing. Gotta give it to Fellwar Stone, though. Fallen Empires. Here we get into a few sets that have wildly different power levels. Fallen Empires, notably very, very low. And then the next set we're gonna talk about is full of absolute bangers. But Acacia Money Changer, a card that sees play in exactly one deck, and that is Tayam, because Acacia Money Changer enters with 3 counters on it for a 1-drop, especially if you have Tayam in play. That enters with 4 counters on it. You get a Tayam activation out of that, plus you get some left over. Just lines up well in exactly one deck. I looked through this card file. If you see something else that sees play somewhere, you let me know, but I think it's easily Acacia Money Changer, even though Tayam right now is a pretty dead deck post-ban. This has still been, you know, Tayam's a piece of cEDH history, and people are still playing it, and it definitely could come back. This is a card that they play in a set with not a lot of playables. Ice Age, way different, way different. Some of the most broken Magic designs of all time are on the screen right now. Ice Age has some absolute bangers, even outside of this, mainly with cards like Pyroblast and Tinderwall, which are both, you know, absolutely cEDH staples. They're just not quite on the level of these cards here. Tinderwall's seen a lot of play in green-red, especially turbo decks, some decks like that. Just lots of Gruul decks. It's just worth playing. It's good. But these 3 bangers on the screen we got here are on a whole different level. We've got Demonic Consultation, 1/2 of the most efficient combo in our format with Thassa's Oracle. Really hard to say much negative about it. You know, people will complain, you know, using it as a tutor isn't that great. It was really, really busted in 60 card 4 of Magic, where you're not that likely to, you know, even now you're not likely to kill yourself by consulting. In 60 card Magic, you were really not likely to. This is basically 1-mana instant speed demonic tutor. It busted. Very busted Magic card. So obviously that's a really powerful one. It's got some utility, a little spooky, but it's part of the best combo in our format, arguably. Most efficient, I'll say. Mystic Remora, Don't Feed the Fish, is like a key part of our format, right? It is a huge sort of heuristic that people pick up that's become this, you know, sort of iconic thing. I will say, though, Mystic Remora, definitely not its most powerful right now. especially the early fish. Turn 1 land fish go kind of sucks now because a lot of other people go land dork pass. And it can honestly be like turn 3 before your fish really starts drawing cards if there's nothing, no super fast win attempt. Definitely was a more powerful card in a turbo-centric meta that was less green focused. But a mid-game Mystic Remora is still just as warping as it's ever been because people eventually will start casting spells and you're going to start drawing cards because they can't pay the 4 even if it's on like turn 5, right? So I think Mystic Remora early just like this will unmulligan me as an Ancestral Recall. Gotten a lot worse, but mid-game fish is still absurd. And then Necropotence is another card that has definitely weakened, but was not long ago arguably the most broken engine in the format in the like really Rog Sci focused meta because of Final Fortune, Born Upon a Wind. Necropotence, just turn 1 Necros and turn 2 Necros were just, that was like the pace of play, and they very consistently killed you because players kind of figured out like, hey, early-ish Necro, pay like 10 life, sculpt a good hand, dump my hand, next turn, go down to like, 3-4 life, and win the game super reliably, super consistently. Is starting to perform a lot worse. We were seeing it in more mid-range decks. Not so much a thing now that they're having trouble converting into black pips. They're just not as incentivized to build their deck in a way that focuses on like ad nauseum, Cabal Ritual, things like that. And it's just harder to get the mana. Necropotence is resource intensive in and out. You need the mana to power it out. You need mana after you do it. You need to kind of sculpt in a way that lines up well. And when you are just not having cards like Crypt and Dockside to super clean it up, then it does get a lot harder and it is less consistent. That's what we've seen. So I think even though earlier, if I had done this list like 6 months ago, I might have put Necro or Remora as number 1. I think right now I would put Demonic Consultation. I think it and Fish have the best argument. I think Necropotence, it's still really busted, but I think overall in its representation in the metagame has fallen off. It could still be like the most powerful or close to it, in like an objective sense. It's just really hard to argue with the power of like Mystic Remora, especially having nothing that really replaces it. Demonic Consultation does have Taint Impact. Necropotence has Necrodom, which is not even anywhere near close to as powerful. So I maybe even would lean towards Mystic Remora now instead. I think I'm going to give it to Mystic Remora, but maybe it's supposed to be Consult. Homelands. This is another set that is really, really weak and kind of pitiful. Merchant Scroll is probably the best card in Homelands, and it sees next to no play outside of in, like mono blue decks, like very, very niche stuff. But I want to give it to Joven because Merchant Scroll isn't any good anyway, so I might as well just pick a random card from the set. I'm giving it to Joven. This guy is a Chad. Look at him. He has an effect on him. He technically has text. 3/3 for 5. You can't really beat that. Joven is a banger. Easily the best card from Homelands. Alliances. This is a set where we have a couple honorable mentions, but we do have a clear winner, I think. Elvish Spirit Guide. Very powerful card. Has been a staple of green decks pretty much forever. And then Limdul's Vault, which is a card that comes in and out of play. Started to see a little bit more now. Still not like a super ubiquitous staple, but is a pretty, it's a card that has a history in our format. But it is clearly Force of Will. The OG original free interaction piece. It's a pitch spell. Force of Will hits everything, hits the creatures. Probably not the best piece of free interaction in our format. You still do 2 for 1 yourself. You could argue it's Fierce Guardianship or Deflecting Swat. There are cards that have, and in some scenarios, like, when you're going to win on your turn, Pact of Negation is very powerful as well. Force of Will is that boy. Hits everything, works on your turn, works on their turn. Sometimes you don't have the blue card, that's fine, but blue is the most broken color in our format, so you're kind of incentivized to have a lot of blue cards. Mirage, also a set that has, I don't think a clear standout, but it does have a couple honorable mentions too. I think these 2 are probably the best, but you also do have Worldly Tutor, Mystical Tutor, and Final Fortune. Worldly Tutor was a lot better when you could build your deck around 1 creature, whether that was Nadu or especially Dockside Extortionist. You could just Worldly Tutor for Dockside and you would do that turn 1. Even if Dockside wasn't good, you just sit there with a Dockside over everybody's head. Now, you don't really have a good turn 1 for a lot of decks. Not every deck, but like a lot of decks just don't have a super powerful, always good in every scenario thing to tutor for on turn 1 with their Worldly Tutor. So that card gets a lot worse. Same with Mystical Tutor, which has been a card that's seen a little bit less play and got cut over time. If you have like a draw engine, it's obviously very good to be able to tutor for interaction in response to your trigger. Works with Crom, Rhystic Study, all that. Enlightened Tutor, I think, has just been the most flexible and useful of these because you can do it in response to something and go grab whatever, touch the Spirit Realm in more niche scenarios. But a lot of times you also just get to assemble a bunch of combos with it, like being able to go grab Underworld Breach, the Lion's Eye Diamond that we've got here, Necropotence, historically, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Rocks, all this nonsense. Draw engines like Rhystic, Mystic. Enlightened Tutor just goes and gets a lot of the most broken stuff in our format, and it's really reliably good early and late, where a lot of the other cards just aren't that great early. Mystical Tutor, a lot of times you just don't even want to do it because you'd rather just draw another card that Enlightened Tutor would have tutored for. And the other one I have to mention is Lion's Eye Diamond. Of course, it's part of what I think is the actual best combo in our format, which is Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, and Brain Freeze. LED, super powerful card, has a lot of synergies with other cards. It's a card that once you play with it, you see it's not just a combo dead card. It works really well with tutors like that. DT, hold priority, crack LED. Other combos like Bomberman with Oriok Salvagers. Other decks that can just combo with it in weird different ways. There's the combo with it in 6. Lots of combos enabled by Lion's Eye Diamond. Very powerful card in our format. Overall, I think I have to give it to Enlightened Tutor, but just because just consistency over time, it's just always good. You might have LED in your hand and it might rot because it might not be part of your game plan at all. It might just never line up. Enlightened Tutor is basically always going to get used. It's super powerful. Makes your deck more consistent. Just, I think, a little bit more ubiquitous. Even though LED is colorless, technically more decks can play it. Enlightened Tutor, just a little too good. And also, it pairs well with Lion's Eye Diamond if you need to go grab that. Visions has like 3 really mid-tier honorable mentions of like Necromancy, Quirion Ranger, and Natural Order. They're cards that do see some play, especially Quirion Ranger, but they're really not played in like very high tier decks. They're not super ubiquitous. They're whatever. And Vampiric Tutor is like the biggest crutch in our format. To be honest, black decks, this is just the unmulligan button. Whatever you need to go grab, you do it. Turn 1, you just have like a mid 4 or 5. Vampiric Tutor will save you. The black tutors are just too nuts, especially Vamp, arguably the best one. You do go down a card, and sometimes, you want that straight to hand that Demonic Tutor offers, but instant speed flexibility is just so impactful and powerful in our format. Lots of decks get rewarded for holding up mana. Vamp Tutor in response to somebody drawing you a card, it's nuts. Vamp Tutor, very clearly better than all the other top deck tutors, the best one in our format by a lot, and easily the best card from Visions. Weatherlight has like 2 okay-ish cards. You've got Gemstone Mine, which is a land that honestly even most of the really all-in turbo decks haven't run. Like your Rog size and stuff weren't even really running that. And you got No Rod, which is an okay stacks piece. Mostly been replaced by Collector Oof because a lot of the decks that want to run that anyways were green, and it's just easier to go find your Collector Oof. Often played together, but No Rod is just okay, especially without Dockside Extortionist. Turning off artifacts is much less necessary for those kind of decks to stay alive. You're seeing way less of Blind Obedience, Collector Oof, No Rod, things like that. It's an okay card. That's kind of the best thing that Weatherlight has to offer. Gemstone Mine, again, is another okay-ish card, but not that many decks run it. We have so many options now. It's just, historically, maybe you would have played it more in the past, but there's just so many good options for lands now. You really don't need it. Tempest, we have some real bangers where I honestly could have put a third card probably on the screen here with Intuition. Just super powerful. Like Intuition as an honorable mention may seem silly. Earthcraft is another one that is way more niche, but is quite powerful in decks that can run it. But Ancient Tomb and Lotus Petal are about as ubiquitous as cards in this format get. I mean, they just go in your deck. If you're not running it because you think you've come up with some smart reason not to, you're probably wrong. These are just 2 of the most powerful mana enablers that are the most ubiquitous, the most free things to include, just the extra mana acceleration in your deck. Lotus Petal also has combos with Breach Brain Freeze, being able to do that if you get your storm count high enough and you have the graveyard to get it going. Just super, super powerful cards. I would probably give it to Ancient Tomb. I think especially now that Crypt is gone, still get that sort of effect. Now that we're down to only really a couple of those. We will get to another one, but it's a lot less played. Could give it to either. I'm probably going to say Ancient Tomb just because of the consistent acceleration it gives you throughout the game. The 2 life, especially now that very few decks are on Necropotence or Ad Nauseam, doesn't add up quite as much. People might pressure you a little bit. Who cares? Whatever. You're accelerated for the rest of the game just off of your first land drop. These cards are just broken. Stronghold. I'm still waiting on Hermit Druid to have its amazing revitalization post-ban. Hasn't happened. Probably won't. That is a card from Stronghold that definitely has a history. There were lots of different piles of green, blue decks, your TNT, stuff like that were running Hermit Druid. Still have some of those pop up every now and then. For the most part, though, not that impactful. And Mox Diamond is, again, one of the most powerful pieces of fast mana in our format. But you could definitely argue that it's the best. It gives you all your colors, has you go down a card, sure, but it lasts forever. And for the low price of like $500 to $600, you too can tap for 1 mana of any color. Exodus is kind of close, actually. So Culling the Weak has been a staple, especially of black Rograk decks, but really just black decks in general. They'll have creatures lying around for the most part. It's good to have a better dark ritual. When you don't care about the creature, sacrifice it, get 4 black. It's obviously really powerful. Helps you Ad Nauseam out of nowhere. gives you an explosive burst. It is still a really, really powerful ritual. Decks are doing a little bit less of that thing, but if you're trying to be explosive, you kind of need every piece you can, and this is one of the best ways to do it. So that Clone the Week acceleration is quite powerful. City of Traders, pretty similar deal. Another soul land, has more of a downside. You really don't want to lead on it in the early game, but sometimes you have to, or sometimes it's just worth it. And then Survival of the Fittest, a card that really wasn't seeing much play for a lot of the time of our format, especially at like when the format was starting to peak and really develop. Not a lot of decks that really could utilize it. And then after the printing of Hazel's Brewmaster, it started to become way more of a thing with TNT, green focused, heavy creature counts, 20 to 25 creature count decks can really take advantage of this. And it assembles the Devoted Druid Hazel's Brewmaster combo really, really effectively. I think I would give it to Culling the Week though, as probably the most ubiquitous of these, the most impactful, probably again, like just giving that big burst of mana is so huge. City of Traders often is paired index with Culling the Week, especially like the rock size, stuff like that, but is a little bit less played, has a much better version, Ancient Tomb. And then Survival of the Fittest again is at its best probably right now that it's been, but it is still more on the niche side. Culling the Week, mainly, not been a card that's been as broken in other formats because they don't have a creature that they just start the game with every game. And it's a lot different when you do, and that can be like a different evaluation where like City of Traders and Survival of the Fittest and other Magic formats have clearly been much more powerful than Culling the Week, just because they're just freer or give you way more consistency. But when you have a creature all the time, you get the consistency that enables Culling the Week. Next up, we're taking a look at Saga Block, one of the most broken Magic sets and blocks of all time. Definitely some cards here that if they weren't banned would be number one. If Tolarian Academy was legal in our format, it would be the best land and it wouldn't even be close. And there's a lot of bangers that just aren't here. Like Saga Block in general will have a lot of more niche things, but just this set alone, we have Windfall, Carpet of Flowers, which has definitely started to see a lot more play. Yawgmoth's Will, which has been a staple of a lot of Rakdos based storm decks, and then Gilded Drake, which is a card that comes in and out of favor. Sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's bad. It's always a card that just can come in at any given point into a deck and probably be fine. There's just a lot of bangers. Gaia's Cradle and Gamble are very powerful Magic cards. Gamble, especially after the printing of Underworld Breach, just became this super ridiculous, really compact way to assemble a combo where you don't even care about the downside. It's just cheaper, especially once the breach is in play. It's just cheaper Demonic Tutor. I don't care where the card ends up. I have access to my whole graveyard. 1 red to search your deck. Pretty powerful. We've mentioned a lot. There is always the downside of discarding a card. The issue usually isn't that, like, oh, I'm, 1 in 5, 1 in 6 to discard the card I gamble for. A lot of times it's like, I need that card and another card not to get discarded. And that's where the downsides can really add up. When you're assembling combos and you have like, a 1 in 3 chance as opposed to like 1 in 6 because you need to not hit 2 of the cards in your deck or in your hand. But it's still just so powerful. 1 mana tutor to hand, especially in decks that can use the graveyard. Gaia's Cradle, a card that was always pretty good in our format, but especially now has become really, really a major part of what we do. Temna Thrasios and green decks in general popping off. Rockthras itself is basically built around Gaia's Cradle as a ridiculous engine and trying to break it with cards like Snap, Eternal Witness, combos, Cloud of Fairies, Candelabra of Tawnos, Manamo, like just so many different ways to enable this card. And it's worth building your deck around. It's so powerful. Such a great mana accelerant at a time when there's not that many of them, especially not very fast ones, specifically in green. Gaia's Cradle can be one of the most impactful cards in a lot of different decks and a lot of scenarios, and pairs really well with cards that we're going to talk about in one of these other Urza's Block sets. Honestly, pre-ban, I think it was Gamble clearly. Just Cradle was not the thing to do. But honestly, Gamble, I feel like, is more replaceable than Gaia's Cradle can be. Like, it's just so unique for the decks that run it. Yeah, I know I run Growing Rights of Itlimoc to get a second Cradle, but not a lot of other decks can support that. And whether or not it's even that good enough, I still need to test more, but it's been pretty good. But Gaia's Cradle is just becoming a major part of decks. Like, I'm seeing Timna Thrasios decks that are running Sowing Mycospawn and Cloud of Fairies because they're jacking the Rockthras style and building their deck around Cradle like that, which is really cool to see. I actually think it's Gaia's Cradle. Pre-ban, Gamble, and the combo in a more combo fast format, Gamble is clearly better than Gaia's Cradle. If people have time to slow down, Cradle tap for 2. Next turn, Cradle tap for 3. Like, it's just better Ancient Tomb in a lot of decks, especially with Roger, as your commander. But yeah, I actually think it's Gaia's Cradle right now. Wow, look at that. The very next set, we found a way to break Gaia's Cradle. Kind of a theme of this block was lands that tap for a lot of mana with Serra Sanctum, Gaia's Cradle, especially Tolarian Academy, and cards that untap those lands and are free even when the lands aren't broken. Like Snap is just a free spell, but when you have a Gaia's Cradle or especially an Academy in play, it's also it's a bounce spell that also nets you, 8 mana or something absurd like that. They really didn't know what they were doing back in the day, to be honest, and because some of the stuff is broken. And then if you're worried like, oh man, how am I going to possibly find one of those super broken lands that I get to run? Whatever should I do? Oh, I'll just Crop Rot, which brings the land into play untapped for a green. Card's free. It's another free card. I don't understand why the land goes into play untapped. It's just so nuts. And these cards, I will say Snap has fallen out of favor in a post-Dockside world where you can't use it to bounce your own Dockside for free. Yeah, it's still a good card, especially in Cradle decks, because, or, even in decks that like lean more into the Ancient Tomb, stuff like that. Like you could still run it like in Rogsai, but there are kind of both a lack of broken things for you to use, you don't have a Dockside. And then you also have way less creature hate right now at the moment because there's no oofs. Drannith is basically not a staple at this point in the format anymore. So there's much less necessary things to get rid of, whereas Snap, I think, is not as necessary in the format anymore. Whereas crop rotation has just gotten better and better with printing of really busted lands like Talon Gates, Shifting Woodland. Manamo has become much more impactful with the printing of the One Ring and Cradle decks just being more of a thing. Crop rotation obviously goes and grabs your Cradle. It grabs Emergent Zone, which both is a flash enabler for more fair sit back and be parasitic, kind of control game plans that your Thrasio style decks will play. And also it's an enabler for green Necropotence decks to go have an instant speed enabler that, even if you're not in blue or if you're in blue, it just pairs really well where, I can hit Final Fortune, Crop Rotation, or Born Upon a Wind in my instep to be able to just pop off in the instep and win with Necropotence. And not even mentioning some of the other really broken cards in this set, like Grim Monolith, which is probably the worst piece of fast mana that people will run. Will usually be like the last one added, but is still pretty good. Defense Grid, which is a card that is seeing less play now and is a little bit worse post-ban, but is still a really impactful thing to be able to do for just 2 mana. It's shut down the table. And then Cloud of Fairies, another really broken enabler to just get to do a really stupid thing, to have just a free creature as the floor that also has cycling if it's bad. I have cycled it before. And then if you have Gaia's Cradle or any other land that's doing unfair things, Gaia's Cradle Banamo, my Cloud of Fairies was just 2 mana, make 10 mana or whatever. Just really busted. Again, that card not ubiquitous enough to put on here, but is definitely getting close. Then we're looking at Urza's Destiny, which definitely is a little bit of a fall off compared to the other sets. You do have some cards that have a little bit of a reputation. Pattern of Rebirth. These have also been paired together historically. Pattern of Rebirth mainly been known to use to tutor up things like Protean Hulk straight into play. And then Academy Rector, which has been used to tutor up things like Pattern of Rebirth to put Protean Hulk into play. Or in like some of the Rocco decks, you'll use it to assemble Food Chain or to be able to potentially grab like some just powerful enchantment. I've seen some run like City of Solitude and be able to go grab that, or Food Chain is really flexible, really nice. Just a pretty powerful card. A little on the slow side, kind of requires some other setups to be able to make use of it, but still powerful cards. Cheating stuff into play still is strong. These are just kind of like on the slower end of things and on the more clunky side of the format. Have a reputation, pop up every now and then, especially Academy Rector, but just don't really quite compare to like the other Urza's block bangers. Probably is some honorable mention stuff I'm missing from Destiny that's a little bit better, but there definitely was a little bit of a toning down in Destiny compared to Saga and Legacy. And that toning down kind of continued for Magic after that because that block was so broken, that they threatened to fire everybody who worked on it, basically. Mercadian Masques still does have some powerful things. You've got cards like Snuff Out, which is starting to see a little bit more play in a post-Nas world, which is just a sad statement that I said there. But we're not really casting Nas, so free removal spell, go burr. And then Food Chain, a card that is so powerful and so known for its ability to close out a game of Magic that people have to make a saying for it to let you know that it is capable of winning the game. It's really uncommon that that's the case. Usually it's just like, oh, well, I lost to Breach or Thoracle or this other combo. Man, that sure happens a lot. And I don't have to remind people that those combos are good because they win all the time. But Food Chain is unique in that it almost never actually wins the game, but people will affirm to themselves that it does for no reason at all or to no gain. Food Chain is an okay card. I like making fun of it because it is a very clunky combo. Horrendous into the current metagame of gem a bunch of Rhystic Studies and clones of Rhystic Studies, and Food Chain mana cannot pay for Rhystic Study. So you will draw the table their decks. You will lose, more than likely. The printing of like Beseiju, Otawara make it to where there's just more things that interact with you in an unfavorable way. This falls apart to creature remove a lot of times because Food Chain on the stack exile the thing that costs the most mana. You now don't have enough mana to do the thing. Loses to counter spells because it's a creature combo that requires casting a non-creature spell. Food chain just really loses to a lot of different things, requires a lot of different setup, and often is there to enable a commander that without food chain isn't really that great. There have been ones that pop off, like I think Rocco still is quite powerful and does enough outside of food chain to where throwing food chain and squee into your deck doesn't really feel like it has that much of a cost. When your deck is built around food chain, your deck is mostly built around probably like the 15th or 20th best win con in the format, and it's just really not that good. It hasn't aged that well. A lot of the decks that have done well without it just have a core where they get to use other better win cons, like Atraxa, which isn't even really the best deck anymore and even wasn't at its peak, just had access to other things that were really powerful, and food chain was just a different thing you could do. But I will forever enjoy making fun of food chain wins games because it really doesn't. Another set where there really aren't any honorable mentions. This is kind of the best you got. Snuff Out, Food Chain, they're okay. I think Snuff Out probably a little underplayed. Food Chain probably played about the right amount. You don't see it too much. There's, it pops up every now and then. Sometimes it makes more sense than others. They're cards. Nemesis, a set with cards also. This is one where I think there's a clear winner in terms of current play, and it's definitely Submerge because green is way more popular and blue has always been super popular, especially right now. So I think Submerge is just kind of the most played from this set. There are other things like Daze and Mog Salvage. Daze sees play in some faster decks, Rockside, things like that. I've even seen it in like a TNK or two. Gets a lot worse when the metagame is like Seedborn Mew shenanigans. Mog Salvage, basically just a Quark card. Divining Witch or Dividing Witch, whatever, this bald-headed spell shaper here. Mainly a card back in like the kind of the old TNT days where that deck had more of an identity around doing creature combos with Thassa's Oracle and Labman. Yeah, you get rid of your library with a creature, either Hermit Druid, Divining Witch, or Sacred Guide, and then win with Jace, Thassa's Oracle, whatever. But it's basically like completely fallen out of favor. I really just want to put this one on here because it actually does have a little bit of a track record in very, for the time, powerful decks. Just completely fallen out of favor, not something people are really trying anymore. And our last set has only one card worth talking about. I guess you could talk about Rhystic Tutor, but we're past that. People can hold up 2 mana now. It's over, guys. One of the most warping, impactful, ridiculous cards in our format that just can't really be dealt with in a favorable way. You interact with it, you're losing. You let it stick and interact with it later, you're losing. They're going to get cards every time you try to do a thing. It is arguably the most impactful card in our format right now, and that is Rhystic Study. Do you pay the one is the thing our format is about. It's no longer really about don't feeding the fish. It's like, how many cards do we give the Rhystic Study player? Because I am constantly in a prisoner's dilemma of answering one person's thing, but that feeding the next person's thing. And then when I go to answer them, it'll feed the next person's thing. And it's really hard to favorably take game actions at the moment because of this card. It is so impactful in our format. It did get slowed down a little bit. You can't go land crypt Rhystic Study anymore, thank God. But the main thing that I think it really gained from that is it's now harder to generate mana to reasonably pay for Rhystics. You can't do a dockside to punish people dumping these kind of cards into play and then actually reasonably pay for your spells. You have less things like Mana Crypt that are worth paying for because they're going to give you the mana over the course of the game to help pay for things and also help you power out cards worth giving up a card for. Rhystic Study, one of the most powerful cards in our format. Don't really have to tell you about it. Just a clear example of like probably the thing that is defining the format. Whether that's good or bad. I think the play patterns are a little bad, but here we are. It's clearly Rhystic Study. Arguably one of the best cards that we've looked at today, period. You could argue Soul Ring or, some of these other combo pieces, but this is going to be the last one that we look at today. It's about 20-ish sets, closing out Masques block. So you let me know what was the best card that we took a look at today from the first 21, something like that, Magic sets. What do you think is number one? Which set do you think I got wrong or had other honorable mentions that maybe I forgot to bring up or, just kind of looked over? Let me know. If you want more of this thing, I think I have these written out up to like Magic Origins where I've figured out, Magic 2015. So I probably have like the next video or 2 of it ready to record if people are interested in this, but we'll just have to see. Let me know if you like this or something similar, what you want to see next, more tournament reports, break down some cool decks. With all that being said though, thank you so much for watching. And as always, go play cEDH. Have a good one, everybody.